Good evening, councillors and members of the public. Before we commence the meeting, I'd like to draw your attention to the fire regulations behind me and on the screen up there. There is no practice planned for this evening, so if the alarm goes off, make yourself scarce by the relevant fire exits, and we'll meet over outside the canopy of Waitrose. And members of the public, I'd like to say that as a committee, we understand that matters under consideration tonight can be emotive. However, please be respectful to those around you and the committee and refrain from any cheering, booing or other forms of disturbance, please. Thank you. So we move to the main items of business. Item number 1 is the minutes, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of November 2017. Members, these minutes have been before you or on the desk there for the last 30 minutes. Have I your permission to sign them? Thank you. Amy, do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Val Henry, Councillor Jeanette Stennett and Councillor Stuart Stennett.
Thank you. Have we had any declarations of interest prior to the meeting or any to be made?
None before the meeting, Chairman.
Thank you. Committee. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. I should declare a non-prejudicial interest in agenda item 7.4 by virtue of having sat on the Bramley Parish Council Planning Committee that, whilst not objecting to the overall proposal, did express concerns about the original proposal to retain a container on site as a building. So, that's...
Thank you. Amy, are there any questions from the public received?
Thank you, Chairman. None received.
Relevant updates to government guidance. Steve Weaver, would you like to take that one?
Thank you, Chairman. Nothing to report at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. And while you've got your microphone switched on, would you like to give us your performance against government targets figures? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Not just my performance, it's a performance of us all. If I can take members to page 5 of your agenda papers, and the reporting of the Council's performance against government targets for planning is a matter that the Executive has asked to form part of all committee papers going forwards. This is the first time we've had data available for you. Essentially, the government targets relate to how well an application authority is performing in terms of 2 criteria, speed and quality. And on the tables there, you'll find information in relation to both criteria. For the purposes of each criteria, they're split into major applications and non-majors, and you've got the definitions also on your papers. And so if I quickly run you through, in terms of speed, you'll see both in the major and non-major categories, the Council's performing extremely well in relation to what the national targets are. Nearly 98% of majors being dealt with on time and 97.5% of non-majors, and that's real credit to the efforts of all the team in terms of getting decisions underway and dealing effectively and collaboratively with applicants. So that's a very, very healthy situation, and clearly no danger of designation in respect of those criteria. Turning to the criteria relating to quality, now the way this is measured is in terms of how many decisions in each category are effectively overturned on appeal. And if I start with the non-majors, as a pool of decisions, there's a great many more of those. We have relatively less appeals as a proportion of the total, and still fewer are allowed as a proportion of that total. So you'll see against a target of 10%, we're down at 1.56%, which is a very healthy place to be. And I don't think there's any concerns in that regard. Major applications is probably where the key focus we need to be diligent on. Again, same target, 10% or less. And the position that we're at as at the end of December is that 6.4% of our decisions, total decisions, had been allowed at appeal, overturned at appeal. Now, the government haven't finally concluded where they're going to draw the line in terms of where the statistics are drawn from. It's a slightly odd performance indicator. What it's testing is the decisions that are made between the 1st of April and the 31st of March, 1st of April 2015, I should say, and 31st of March 2017. And then it allows a 9-month roll-on, because clearly if an application was refused at the end of March 2017, to allow the appeal process to go through, the government's allowed an extra 9 months. In Waverley's case, we still had 10 appeal decisions outstanding at the end of December. And it's not clear yet whether or not the government will effectively guillotine the position as at the end of December, in which case that 6.4% figure is our return, and therefore we are comfortably below target, or whether or not they'll take on board any further application decisions coming through since that time. So far this year, of the 10 outstanding at the end of last year, we've had 2 subsequent decisions. They've both been allowed. So if you ran the statistics again, we're moving up from 6.4. We're going in the wrong direction, if you like, relative to that performance indicator. But as I say, it's not clear yet where the government are going to draw the line. If they draw the line at the end of December, which we think they probably will, but we don't know that, then our return will be at 6.4%, which is not in danger of any designation. Going forwards, this is an agenda item that will come forward to each of the meetings. We'll update it according to the monthly figures as at each particular point in time. And we are expecting in the next few weeks, hopefully, to hear what the next assessment period will be, because whilst the first assessment periods were set, the government haven't confirmed what the next set of assessment periods are. So once we've got that all clear, we'll be able to give you again a further update and give a direction of travel and how we're looking. So just to wrap up, Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions. Probably easier to take them offline if they're about any particular cases. But generally speaking, across 3 of the 4 criteria, very healthy position and reflects a lot of good work. It's in the majors and the appeals where we need to keep an eye on how we're doing, monitor the results, and obviously make sensible decisions that we know will stand scrutiny. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. Very encouraging. Members, does anybody have any general comments to make? As Steve said, if anybody's got any concerns or comments or questions about any specific cases, they can speak to him after the meeting. Thank you. Just a note that should site inspections be necessary, they'll be held on Monday the 5th of March. I'm hoping they won't be necessary because I think all applications that we're dealing with tonight have been visited in one way or another. So the first item, 7.2, item A1, application reference WA 2017-1763, and the proposal is the erection of a 2-storey side extension and alterations including dormer window following demolition of existing single-storey side extension, and it's a revision of WA 2017-0899 at Hunt Cottage, Hambledon Road, Godalming. Catherine, would you like the application?
Thank you, Chairman. Members, you may recall this application was reported to you previously on your meeting of the 29th of December last year. The decision was taken by yourselves at that meeting to defer the application in order to allow officers to negotiate amendments to the design of the extension following concerns expressed by the committee. You'll recall the site is located to the east of Hydesdale Crossroads, and it comprises 1/2 of a pair of semi-detached cottages. These are the existing elevations, so the front elevation, the rear elevation and the side elevation there. Floor plans, as you can see, currently 3 bedrooms on the first floor with kitchen, living room and a bathroom on the first floor, ground floor. This is the proposed block plan. As you can see, the proposal relates to a side extension to the northeastern elevation shown in pink. The proposal also includes the provision of 3 parking spaces on hard standing to the front of the site. Just to refresh your memories, these are the elevations of the proposal considered at the meeting on the 29th of November. So we're talking about, this is the rear elevation. This extension here is two-storey extension, together with at the front, obviously, it dropping down to ground floor eaves height with a dormer window feature. The accommodation proposed would be an enlarged kitchen living area with a sitting room and bathroom, and the creation of an additional bedroom and bathroom at first floor level. These are the elevations that have been amended following the deferral and following discussion with officers. The front elevation of the extension has been redesigned to allow for a drop in the ridgeline to better reflect that at the adjoining property, Rycroft. The rear extension has been hipped from a gable design, reducing its bulk and mass. And on the rear elevation, the dormer window arrangement has been altered to be similar to that at Rycroft and to be both dormers the same size. This is just the return elevation, obviously looking at Rycroft with Hunt's Cottage beyond. Another matter which this committee was concerned about was the position of the extension and its relationship to the boundary and therefore site ownership. I can confirm that officers have visited the site and measured the position of the dwelling in relation to the boundary and verified the distances. We have therefore got an amended plan from the applicant that accurately shows the position of the dwelling and the proposed extension in relationship to the boundary. At the front of the property here, there will be a separation of around 400 mil from the ground floor and around 300 mil at the rear, the boundary tapering as it does. The plans also submitted indicate that all of the overhang on the side elevations, including the roof form, would be within that site boundary. Officers are therefore confident that in making a decision, you would do so on a valid planning application. Just to refresh your memories, I know there was a site visit previously. This is the front elevation, so the application property here, the adjoining property Rycroft, which has already been extended in a similar way. This is the rear elevation, again, Rycroft on the left and Hunt Cottage here as existing. Before I run you through the determining issues, just a quick verbal update. There has been an additional letter of representation expressing collective objection to the amended scheme from local residents. The letter also makes some suggestions with regards to further amendments that residents would like to see. However, I must remind members that this evening you are to make a decision based on the plans before you. In reference to the clarification on the boundary issue that I referred to earlier, as I mentioned, we have got a revised plan to clarify that, and as such, the plan numbers condition recommended needs to be amended to insert today's date after the plan number sharp 2B. The matters of judgment this evening for members are the impact of the development on the Greenbelt and the OMB and AGLV, the visual amenity and design of the proposals, the impact on residential amenity and parking. The recommendation remains, therefore, that permission be granted subject to conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. This application has public speaking, and I would like to invite Sylvia Harrison, the objector, to speak first. I understand that the technical side of things has been explained to you, and you have 4 minutes from the time when you start speaking. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Sylvia Harrison, and once again I speak on behalf of the residents of Hydestow Crossroads. We are very dismayed that since your last meeting, little has changed. This application remains an impossible attempt to convert a small cottage on a tiny plot into a 4-bedroom family house. When asked for guidance on extensions, your planning department gave us a copy of this, Residential Extension Supplementary Planning Document. The opening pages include such advice as employ an architect and talk to your neighbours. The applicant has done neither. The lack of a qualified architect is a major problem, as this is not a simple project. Bearing in mind the requirements of the heritage officer, it would also be a complicated build. Even such a simple detail as the new additional parking space has been badly designed. It is too short, and so some cars will stick out into the communal access area. Referring to Saved Policy D4, the document states that development should, in particular, be appropriate to the site in terms of scale, height, form, and appearance. To achieve these principles, one would expect, for example, a continuation of the cat slide roof to the rear, rather than the bulky extension proposed. For the front elevation, it states that extension should be set back a minimum of 0.5 metre. This has still not been done. Dropping the ridge line does not, by itself, make this extension subservient. Further on, it says that generally, 2-storey side extensions should not come within 1 metre of the boundary and rear extensions within 3. This extension does not just come closer to this than to the boundary, it will actually go over it. The Heritage Officer has requested that the existing side gable end be replicated in any extension. As this gable sticks out by 53 centimetres, the proposed 25 centimetre gap will not be enough to keep the extension within the boundary. We are appalled that your officer's report considered this to be just a civil matter. If built, Waverley will then be complicit in the legal action that would follow. It is also very upsetting that Waverley is going against its own guidelines in recommending acceptance of this application. We consider that the more modest proposal which we sent to you all demonstrates how it could be done to modernise and extend the cottage and still tick all the boxes by following best planning principles. It also shows that by allowing this application, you really would be missing an opportunity to preserve, in the words of Councillor Henry, things which are just a little bit special in this very special area. If this application were to be allowed, it would make a mockery of all the trouble your committee has gone to, including the site visit, your informed and detailed deliberations, and valued comments. So please reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Maxine Long from the Parish Council. Good evening. Once again, you have 4 minutes from when you start speaking.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Parish Council was very surprised to learn that given the quite specific instructions from this committee, the applicant has not come up with anything less disproportionate and therefore more acceptable. At your last meeting, Councillor Ellis stated the importance of symmetry and that the extension should be clearly subservient. The proposed front elevation is still not set back at all. It also shows a gabled dormer, which does not match the others on the building. Councillor Seaborn spoke of the disproportionate bulk and intrusiveness of the proposal, and Councillor Band amplified this, saying that the overbearing nature of the extension changes the whole style and impact of the cottages. He then went on to mention the overdominance of the proposed rear gable construction, rather than it following the existing cat slide with dormers. This was echoed by Mr. Chairman, saying that the extension could have been made to continuous style. No changes have been made to reduce the extension's bulk. The internal layout remains identical, and there has only been the merely cosmetic change of changing the gable end to a large hip. Mr. Chairman also pointed out that the assurances given that the extension would not overhang the neighbouring property were unsatisfactory, and that 0 dimensions and drawings had been given. No explanatory drawing has been provided. The existing floor plan has now been marked to show a 25 centimetre gap at ground level between the extension and the property boundary. It is a matter of fact that the gable end at the side of Hunt Cottage protrudes 53 centimetres from the wall at ground level. It was also confirmed by Mr. Chairman at the last meeting that the Heritage Officer has requested that the existing gable end is to be reproduced on the extension. The proposed 25 centimetre gap will therefore still be insufficient to prevent the extension overhanging the neighbouring property. I can also confirm that the side of the cottage is not parallel to the boundary. This is quite precise, being the original Hunt headquarters iron railings. The original cottage side wall is 269 centimetres from the boundary at the front and 259 centimetres at the rear. It will therefore be even closer at the back of the proposed extension and produce even more overhang. Councillor Graham was right when he said that these proposals were pushing the boundaries and that it is a design which is not practical to achieve on this site. Councillor Byam said the proposal was overdevelopment and out of keeping. He then went on to say that he felt that the changes that would be needed to make this application acceptable were too substantial to be coped with by deferral. Sadly, he has been proved right, as nothing substantial has been changed. It is impossible to reduce the overall bulk and impact of an extension without also making the internal dimensions smaller. This has not been done, and this application therefore remains unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Faye Sharp will speak in support of the application. Thank you.
I acquired Hunt Cottage in 2016, and it became quite apparent to me quite quickly that for safety reasons and due to subsidence that the current extension would need to be knocked down and replaced by a new extension. I submitted plans in 2017 in May to Waverley, who advised me of objections, and I therefore withdrew and put a new plan in for extension. In August, I met with Mr. Ricks, the Heritage Officer on site, and my architect and builder. We took advice and then moved the extension to the rear of the building as per the recommendations, and also to ensure that the street scene was in keeping and suitable to the current position. Before submitting these plans in September, I met with Mr. Ricks for his view, and he remained happy with the new proposal and gave me his support. Planning was then resubmitted. Objections were then received, and I was advised that this would have to go to committee. Committee site inspected in late November with Mr. Bryson on site, the planning officer, and no questions or feedback given to me by the committee. I did point out that there was considerable movement and there was a huge gap and that we would need to do an extension of some kind. The committee meeting happened on the 29th of November, and I must apologise. My husband had a brain hemorrhage the following day. He was due to represent me and he arrived late, so he was very poorly, so I apologise for that. But I was then informed that obviously the decision had been deferred and postponed to this evening. I spoke to Mr. Bryson following the situation in December and agreed to change the plans in keeping with the recommendations that you very kindly made to take into account the car parking, the proximity to the boundary, the dormer at the back of the building, and the ridgeline being adjusted to be more in keeping, and also the use of reclaimed materials to fit in with the current building and make sure it looks in keeping with the area. I completed all of these items and returned the new drawings to Waverley for their feedback in December, and my builder and I had that meeting with both the Heritage Officer and the Planning Officer. They were wholly in support of these amendments, which they reiterated on an email in support of my application. This morning I received a further email asking by today, 3 o'clock, to set new plans to yourselves to show the boundary and to ensure that you were comfortable with the measurements, etc., which I believe the planning officers have been to visit on site and check those details which have been correctly stated. And I am well within the boundary, and the boundary does taper. We have accounted for that, and those details the planning officer is aware of. Throughout the process, the objectives have quoted symmetry with the cottage next door, and yet the cottage next door has both an extension at the rear, the side, and also a 25-foot barn garage, which has been recently amended and added to, which does change the whole look of the front of the cottage. This barn was, or garage or whatever you want to call it, was approved in November, and at the time I saw no planning objections from Busbridge or any other objector that's here today. So I find it unusual that whilst they were happy to allow a 25-foot barn with a 1.8 metre ceiling height and a 5.5 metre width, that mine is obviously not acceptable. So it's just by the by. So more importantly, from your feedback, I've submitted plans to adjust the ridge of the height of the building. I've adjusted the dormer so that it's hipped now, which a few people have mentioned. It's now hipped, not gabled. I've also submitted plans as requested to show that no part of my extension will overhang the adjoining land, and I've sourced local stone to match existing, and also shown car parking spaces that are more than adequate for a property of this size. It's been 9 months now, so I really hope that I can work closely and bring this matter to a close, and I thank you for your attention.
Members. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. I called this item into our November meeting, both at the request of Busbridge Parish Council, because the design as it stood left many concerns for neighbours and nearby residents. Councillor Forozeski had the wisdom to suggest that we defer a decision and give the applicants the opportunity to make adjustments to the application in order to address the numerous concerns raised both by speakers and by colleagues. At that meeting. I have to say that I'm disappointed by the lack of convergence towards what might be deemed an acceptable compromise. All in all, I see us looking at an opportunity lost. Let me re-emphasise that Hunt Cottage is at the centre of a small, isolated community at Hydestyle. It's one of a pair built for the Chiddingfold Hunt with design attributed to the well-known 19th century architect Ralph Neville. And although it's not part of a formal conservation area, both cottages as a pair represent undesignated heritage assets, as we've already had indicated. So I certainly welcome the addition of a car parking space, albeit one which officers note to be marginally substandard. I see this as a necessary move given the lack of access to safe on-road parking at the property. Also, the ridge line has been adjusted to better match that of the adjacent Rycroft cottage. However, the rest of the changes seem to me to be no more than inexpert tinkering. On page 18 of our papers, impact on the green belt is discussed in the context of Save Policy RD2. Each of the three tests is largely a matter of opinion. Test A looks at disproportionateness. Neighbours consider the proposals disproportionate, and I'm inclined to agree with them. The 40% test is just failed, but the calculation includes in the baseline a ground floor extension whose genesis is uncertain. So we have an extension proposed which exceeds the 40% limit and on which we have some doubt about the baseline on which the calculation is carried out. Test B looks at the bulk and the setting after the extension. The cottage will take on a far more dominant appearance after the extension is built. The upper window to the front window to the extension is not aligned with the upper window to the extension in Rycroft and will thus distort the symmetry. and being a higher elevation will be more imposing. When you approach High Style from Milford, this pair of cottages is the first thing you see. As they stand, the pair is unobtrusive and present a welcoming and tasteful entry to the hamlet. The proposals will alter that welcoming view significantly. The bulk of the rear first floor window in the extension is also significant and takes away symmetry with Rycroft. So I'm not satisfied that Test B is met. And I think Test C has also failed in my view. This unlisted heritage building will become far more intrusive into the Hyde style scene if it is extended as proposed. In the event that colleagues should decide in favour of approval, I would like to repeat my earlier desire for an additional condition in that delivery of materials and plant during the building phase will suffer from the same parking constraints that have necessitated the additional parking space. So should we approve, it would seem appropriate to me to request a simple construction transport plan to be submitted and approved prior to any works commencing, because without one I can see short periods where safety and access issues will arise, generating disputes with neighbours. So specifically, because of my interpretation of the tests on the impact on the green belt, I will struggle to support the officer's recommendation to approve, but I'll listen to colleagues' perspectives with interest. Thank you, Chairman.
Anybody else? Councillor Ellis.
Sorry. Thank you, Chairman. I believe that we made a good decision to defer this, hopeful that the application could be improved, and I think that we gave very, very clear guidance as to what we would find acceptable. However, I'm sorry to say, and I agree with the parish councillor who stated very eloquently that nothing substantial has been achieved during the deferment. This application to modernise and extend this property that is in the green belt and is in a very special area, a hamlet, as has been described, would be very harmful. At the moment, I can't support this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you. I just wondered whether or not officers could perhaps give me some reassurance about the measurement to the boundary and the overhanging, because I'm just slightly concerned about that. Perhaps if they could clarify those points. Thank you.
Catherine, do you wish to respond? Yep.
Thank you, Chairman. As I mentioned earlier, we have actually been out and checked everything on site. With regards to the overhang, the overhang shown on the plan of the extension proposed would be 0.25, 0.3 at its maximum. So therefore, on the basis of the plans before you, and on the basis of officers having visited the site at the closest point to the boundary, taking into account the side elevation, I see no reason why we should continue to question the validity of the application in that respect. As officers, we feel confident in making a recommendation to you that this development would be wholly on land, above land, overhanging land within the applicant's ownership. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend, do you wish to come back?
Just to say that thank you for that reassurance. I just wanted to know, because one of the considerations is the supplementary planning document for extensions, and obviously the extension is far less than 1 metre from the boundary. And is that based on what sort of consideration are we giving to that? What weight could we give to that? Thank you.
Catherine?
Thank you, Chairman. As we remind the committee most times, that is guidance there for you. It doesn't apply as a hard and fast rule for every situation. in this situation, we know that this is a very distinct pair of cottages and it doesn't sit within a continuation of a single building line or terrace. The point of that separation is to ensure that there is space maintained around buildings to prevent the coalescence of those buildings and therefore them appearing as a singular terrace. In this case, you've got an isolated pair. There's nothing to the northeast in terms of built form adjacent to that cottage. So really, it's a matter of judgment. And in my opinion, given the circumstances of the site, given that there is nothing immediately adjacent to the boundary, you apply that guidance according to the circumstance. And in this case, I don't think you could maintain an objection on the basis of a terracing effect. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't have the benefit of being at the meeting. I don't think I was at the meeting the last time. I wasn't mentioned in dispatches, so I can't have been. Looking at the plans that were before us and the plans that are now before us, I have to say that I personally, from looking at the plan, and I know where these cottages are very well. I travel past them at least once a week. The front elevation, actually, from my perspective, is acceptable. I appreciate it's not a totally identical to Rycroft, but it's, so far as my view is concerned, it's pretty close to it, and I think with the dropping of the hip roof is acceptable. What I'm not happy about, however, is the rear elevation, where the two-storey pitch at the back. Now, I appreciate it's not going to be seen very easily, but I do feel that is not acceptable to me, and therefore it's all a question of judgment when one's looking at plans as to whether they fit and are acceptable by way of design. But subject to anything else that's maybe said, I am not happy with the rear elevations. I accept that Hunt Cottage has got far less land to play with than Rycroft, and therefore there's far more of a limit on what to get in on the site. And also, so far as the measurements are concerned, I'm happy to accept what the officers say. I'm sure they're right, but in any event, it would only produce probably some legal problems if in fact it went over the boundary, which is not something which should concern us as such. That is a legal matter, not a planning matter. So at the moment, I'm just minded to vote against it because of the rear elevations.
Thank you. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for the public speakers for the comments which they've made were helpful. I think I acknowledge that there have been some changes to the original proposal, but they are limited. And the question is in light of the new plans, are there issues which are sufficiently strong that we can really sustain an objection which stand up to scrutiny outside, from my perspective? And I'm really quivering on the edge. I mean, like Councillor Goodridge, I don't like that rear extension, but I have to acknowledge that Rycroft have the additional space from the barn. And so when you come to look at it, I can understand that to have a comparable accommodation, they may want a somewhat larger extension on that rear side, and the way they've approached it is probably the only way it could be done. It's not ideal, and they haven't gone as far as many of us would like, but I have really some difficulty in seeing that in planning terms we can really sustain a strong objection to where they've got to at this point in time. So I'm very much minded to be either way. I'm interested to hear what others may say, but I think personally sustaining objection is going to be quite difficult. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm listening very closely to what my colleagues say. I feel that the applicant has made some effort to address the situation, and I'm minded to agree with Councillor Goodridge as far as the front is concerned, especially considering that the neighbour actually went and produced their extension first and had cottages coming along and is trying to blend into that. There are differences between Rycroft and Hunt, and I think that the symmetry is virtually there as far as I'm concerned. The rear, I have a bigger problem with it. There is differences between the two cottages. I wouldn't like to weigh up what I think about the barn versus the built form. It would be nice if that extension was taken back a bit. It would be nice if there was more room between the boundary, except for one has to accept that the plot's there. It has constraints in the same way as the neighbour has constraint. And I think I'm minded to say that I think the applicant has gone far enough as far as I'm concerned, and I would tend to go along with officers in terms of their assessment of this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, a lot has been said, a lot of things that I would perhaps have considered saying. I don't agree that the front elevation is improved sufficiently. They've dropped the ridge height a small amount, but of course all the change in terms of the of any lost space, or limited lot space there is, it doesn't come forward. I think that the extension at the front should be subservient, fully subservient to the main building, and not in the way that it's done there. And therefore I'm happy that I'm still very critical and concerned about the closeness to the boundary and the way they're going to be developed. I realise that the development and the building programmes are not something that we consider on planning terms, but I still believe it's likely to overshoot the boundary, but equally, even if it doesn't, the chances or the problems of building that are very difficult. In terms of the comment about the barn, I presume we're talking about the rear extension to the barn of Rycroft, and that actually is an original building. That's not an extension as far as I can understand. I understood it was kennels. Not that we are considering that building other than the fact of what it looks like. I understood that building was originally kennels and therefore part of the original development in the area in 130, 140 years ago, whatever time it was, and that's just been converted for other uses. And the rear extension to me is still too dominant and out of keeping. So I will continue to support that. Whilst it was worthwhile to go to a deferral, I don't think that the applicant has taken sufficient note of what we felt and said, and therefore I will be voting against this application.
Thank you. Anybody else before we move to the Councillor Wojciechowski?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, there was an opportunity and possibly it has been missed, but I agree with Councillor Gray. I do think the applicant has gone to some measures to listen to what's been said, and if there are constraints, I sympathise with both sides here, and it's a very difficult decision to make. As I say, there was an opportunity, they have come forward. I agree with the comments that have been made from the front. I don't have a problem with it. I don't have too much of a problem with the rear, but I think at the end of the day, officers have had an opportunity to look at this, work with both sides, make a recommendation. And where I would be really concerned is it sustainable at appeal? And I personally don't believe it is. And I think with the evidence that all has been done to try and improve it, and it has been improved, I think we're between a rock and a hard place. So it would be with a degree of reluctance that having asked for a deferral and an opportunity for them to come back with something better and more in keeping that would keep everybody happy. That hasn't been met, but we have to acknowledge measures have come forward and has been made to address the issues that this committee made. I don't know how far we can keep going by deferring and so forth and so forth. So I think a decision has to be made tonight on the basis of what's in front of us. And I will be supporting the officer's recommendation because I don't think at appeal it's sustainable. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So if we move to the recommendation as detailed on page 25, but you mentioned updated drawing numbers, and also I think I understood the applicant to say just now that the front dormer would have a hipped roof instead of a gable roof, so, but that doesn't seem to appear on any drawings, so I don't know if we can actually consider that. Over to you, Catherine. Can you give me a revised recommendation, please?
Yes. With regards to the design of the dormer, it's not shown hipped, it's shown to be a gable on the plan, so I don't think you can resolve that through condition. No. You need to make a decision on the basis of the plans before you. The revised recommendation, bear with me, sorry, Chairman. Is that there was also a recommendation by Councillor Seaborn for an additional condition. Yes. So subject to the conditions set out on pages 25 to 28 of the report, with an amendment to condition 6 to insert the words received the 7th of the 2nd 18 after sharp 2b, and subject to an additional condition to require the submission of a construction environmental management plan prior to the commencement of development, that permission be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, members. Hopefully you all heard that. So that subject to the conditions as set out on pages 25 to 28, amended condition 6 and the additional condition just mentioned, and informatives 1 to 4, permission be granted. All those in favour? Thank you. Those against?
1, 2, 3, Chairman.
Any abstentions?
2, Chairman.
Okay, that recommendation is approved then, so that permission is granted. So we move on now to item A2, which is WA 2017-2301. I'm going to let the public gallery empty first, I think. Okay, item A2, WA 2017-2301. The proposal is application under section 73A to vary condition 2 of WA 2015-2371, the condition which requires complete removal of nets and structure to allow structure to remain at Cranley Cricket Club, the Common, Cranley. And Catherine, again, would you like to introduce this?
Thank you, Chairman. Before I go into the presentation, I must advise members of a change to the recommendation for this item. Unfortunately, it's come to light at the very last minute this afternoon that there's a technical issue to do with the certificate of ownership completed by the applicant on this application. In order to avoid the committee this evening making a technically unsound decision, officers in conjunction with the council's solicitor recommend that the application is deferred from this meeting to allow officers to resolve this matter with the applicant. Chairman, I therefore recommend that members may want to take a vote on that decision at this point before I continue with the presentation if necessary. Thank you, Chairman.
So, members, the revised recommendation is that we defer this application. All those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. With apologies to those in the public gallery who turned up to speak this evening. Right, so we move on to item B1, WA 2017-2013. The proposal is the change of use to a mixed use of equestrian and agricultural use with the erection of a stable block, chicken coop, storage barn, horse walker and associated works. Amended description as amended by plan received on the 29th of November 2017 and the 10th of January 2018 at land to the north of Lydia Park, Paynes Hill Copse, Stovall's Hill, Cranley. Cranley, yes. And Victoria is going to introduce this application.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. This is land to the north of Lydia Park, Paynes Hill Copse, Stovall's Hill, Cranley. We have a change of use to the mixed use of equestrian and agricultural use for the erection of a stable block, chicken coop, storage barn, horse walker and associated works. Here we have the location plan. And we have aerial photographs of the site dated 2012 and 2017. You'll see on the 2017 site that development has occurred. This is the hard standing here, stable block here. This is a view north from the bottom of Stovall's Hill. Development can be seen here on the right-hand side. This is a view west towards the stable building. And we have the edge of the chicken run on the right-hand side. And here we have the block plan. Excuse me. Here we have the block plan. Just to confirm on the update sheet, you'll note that the paddock, which is described here on the block plan, is included in the equestrian use. The hard standing area, less all the buildings, is 1,178 square metres. It is a material consideration that permission has been granted previously on this site for the change of use to the keeping of horses, formation of an access and erection of stables. That permission was granted in 2014. However, it is not considered implemented due to the fact that the development that did occur on site was so different to the permission granted of 2014 and that those conditions weren't met, that it was not implemented. The development occurred and therefore the development that has occurred is unlawful. The current permission, for comparison, there is an increase in hard standing, there are larger stables, there is an addition of a storage barn here, addition of a temporary chicken coop, and addition of a horse walker. Here we have the storage barn, required for various vehicles for equestrian use, such as trailer, lawnmowers, topper, tractors, traps, horse walker and horse box. Here we have the horse walker and chicken coop. The chicken coop has a recommended temporary permission for 2 years. And here we have the stables, which have already been built. This is the stables in situ. This is a plan of the interior of the stables. Here we have the stables which were permitted under the 2014 permission. The ridge height is 3 metres on the proposed stables. The permitted stables of the ridge height was 3.1 metres. I thought it might be helpful for some statistics on the granted and proposed stables. The proposed stables are considerably larger than those permitted in 2014, particularly the depth. As you'll see, the permitted was 3.65, the proposed is 11 metres, leading to a increase in the footprint to 121 square metres. On to the determining issues. The matters of principle and technical opinion are the planning history and differences with previous proposal, the loss of agricultural land and highway considerations. The matters of judgment are impact on the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside and impact on landscape character and visual amenity, impact on residential amenity, and compliance with RD13. If I could just turn to the update sheet. There are some amendments to the conditions. The permission, the recommendation is that permission be granted subject to the conditions set out on page 51 and 52 of the agenda report, with the amendments to condition 3 and 4 as detailed on the update sheet. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Victoria. Members. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Victoria. Members. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. I asked for this application to be brought to committee because of the concerns expressed by Bramley and Alfold parish councils. I note only one neighbour objection on the website, though given the relatively remote location, maybe that's not surprising. The concerns of Bramley Parish Council about retention of a container masquerading as a building has been dealt with in discussions which post-date the initial application, so that's largely gone away. The objections lodged by Alfold Parish Council have more substance, and I suspect Councillor Dinas may well talk about those. I thank officers for organising Monday's site visit and colleagues for attending on a rather cold morning. I think it was highly valuable to see the context of this application. The principle of change to equestrian use was established in 2014, so I agree with the officer's conclusion that that's not for discussion. Of main concern are the questions of the bulk of the proposed buildings and their impact on countryside beyond the green belt and on an area of great landscape value. And also the question of how well the applicants will comply with the terms of any decision, given the number of breaches of existing conditions that we saw. In my view, Victoria has done a really good job of working with the applicants to turn this application into something far more acceptable than the initial version. If the site is developed as stated, then the only design aspect that really concerns me is the height of the new storage barn. It becomes a matter of judgment as to whether its bulk will constitute an overbearing structure when viewed from the west. And I suspect it's not going to be overly visible. If I may point out that the Highway Authority in its communication of the 24th of January requested a condition on visibility displays at the point of access, which has not been included in the conditions. So I would ask that officers either explain why this hasn't happened or considering including it, because Stovall's Hill is quite a busy access road to Dunsfold Aerodrome and is heavily used. So to me, the critical aspect of this application is that its correct implementation is enforced. The various planning breaches that we witnessed during the site visit need to be corrected. But if that's done and the plans are implemented in accordance with the application, then I'm inclined to support the recommendation to approve. It seems to me that supporting equestrian activities in this rural location is a valid and reasonable thing to do. But I'd be interested to see how colleagues view this. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Dinas.
Thank you, Chair. In fact, a lot of what I was going to say has been covered by my colleagues, so I won't repeat it. But as it's been mentioned about the Alfold Parish Council and some of the concerns they've raised. Size and scale of the development, size, mass and scale of proposed storage building, which I agree with. And I think that is a real concern. I mean, I remember when this was discussed several years ago, and we ended up with a building being built far in excess what was agreed. So that's always a disappointment when they come back later to try and put a building in that they've already built, which they didn't have permission to build. And I think that it's 4 times the size of what it was supposed to be. The one thing which I would like to ask the officers, or I'd like to suggest 2 additional conditions if this is approved. I've looked at the previous application and the conditions, and I have a copy here, and the condition 1 and 2 I think are still very pertinent. There's a couple of reasons for that, and those conditions are, the condition 1 says no commercial activity shall take place on the site, including the storage of materials. And the second condition was no vehicle other than those directly related to the equestrian use of the land shall be stationed, parked or stored on the site. And then it continues. Now, although this area technically falls within my colleague's area, Councillor Seaborn, I drive past that area on a regular basis. And on countless occasions, I've seen vehicles being driven in and out and stored in there which are not for equestrian use. I've also had a number of people who have spoken to me locally who have complained with a similar, witnessing similar vehicles being used in that area. So I've had complaints as well as what I've actually seen myself. So should this committee be minded to agree this application, I would like those conditions put forward. Although, Chair, I think condition 2, the wording, I think, can almost be cut in half because I think it just repeats itself. And that condition where it says no vehicle other than those directly related to the equestrian, I think the private equestrian would be good. But then when it gets to or stored on the site, I don't think the rest of the condition is applicable. Thank you.
Thank you. Officers, would you like to comment on the those 2 suggested conditions?
Thank you, Chairman, if I may. So firstly, with regard to Councillor Denis' suggestion of the additional conditions, officers see no reason why condition 1, which is about restricting commercial activities on the site, perfectly reasonable to include that. The second condition relating to the vehicles in connection with the use of land, it would be more difficult to enforce that, to prove that those vehicles are there or not there in connection with the equestrian use of the land. But in the circumstances given that it was on a previous consent, it's not completely unenforceable. Therefore, if members would feel more comfortable with that condition, there's no reason why it can't be included on any permission granted here. With regards to Councillor Seaborn's question in relation to the highways condition regarding the visibility displays, I think the answer to that question is the access to the site and the established use of the site are both lawful. Therefore, it's not strictly necessary to have that because you're not granting a change of use or a proposed access. However, for completeness, there's no harm in putting that condition on if members feel it would be appropriate. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, well, much has been said about this. The point that Councillor Denis made with regard to the vehicles and the piece that we're discussing there in terms of conditions is interesting. I believe that while we were on the site visit, a very large vehicle tried to drive in, then suddenly realised we were there and reversed out and went a different direction. Can't prove that, of course, because nobody chased after the vehicle to find out what it was about, but that's certainly what was apparent to me, and I've certainly had many complaints about the fact that commercial vehicles are being parked on that site and other activities, whatever they might be, whilst I quite agree, very difficult to monitor, nevertheless, do break what was originally agreed upon, which we have now told wasn't completed. The other one, which
we didn't brought up at all, but was brought up on the site visit, was the point about laurel hedging along the side of the building. I believe that Councillor Goodrich mentioned a concern about laurel hedging and horses. Certainly laurel hedges and children are a hazard in terms of berries, etc. I would hate to think that we agree, or in fact require them to place laurel hedging alongside, and then subsequently there's some equestrian disaster with the horses nibbling at the berries. So is it possible that we ought to be changing that, or indeed perhaps making no comment?
Thank you. Councillor Goodrich, has Councillor Byam stolen your horticultural thunder?
No, I'll carry on with what I was going to say. Can I, various questions and comments. As I understand it, the horse walker that's going into the site, and it's difficult to see from the drawing, I assume it's the horse walker that was on the site somewhere else, just being moved, or is it going to be a new, more substantial looking horse walker? Because the picture of the horse walker looked a bit more substantial than the one that was there, which clearly can't be used where it was because there was bricks all over it, and the horse would do itself no end of harm by actually using the horse walker where it is at the moment. But that was one comment that I wanted to make. The other comment I wanted to make was there's no specific condition, and I think with this applicant one has got to spell things out about the removal of the, I mean, it's pretty obvious you can't put the horse walker where it's going to go unless the container disappears, but should we be putting a condition of removal of the container and the 3 big posts that appeared, which I understand was going to be a chicken coop extension, but they stopped. But I think that those things ought, in my view, some condition that those 2 things be removed, and all rubbish and other things, because I can see it. I agree entirely with the suggestion of the extra conditions relating to particularly the parking of vehicles. It seems to me fairly easy to prove a breach if it comes to it, because if a great big lorry which purports to be something to do with some trade or other is there overnight and a photograph is taken, the applicant has then got to explain why, what connection this particular vehicle had to the equestrian events. But prior to the site visit, I was very concerned about the laurel hedge, because I did look it up on site. As my wife's a horse owner, I do know what things horses like or don't like them. I looked it up on the web, and I understand that a horse will not generally want to eat laurel because it is pretty leathery and not nice. But if there is not sufficient grass and it does eat it, it is poisonous. But having looked at the site and being told, well, horses aren't going to just graze on this paddock willy-nilly, because A, at the moment, there's no fence to the road. And secondly, I understand the practice for these horses is that they either go, I think there was a bit of electric fencing in the middle of the field, which they went into, or they're tethered. But I mean, it is a concern that we put a condition of laurel on, although I think laurel was what they asked for. If then a horse eats it and dies, I'm just slightly concerned about that. But whether you can put another informative or a thing to say that horses will not be allowed to graze within X feet of the hedge, I don't know. But I'm just, if we have a condition that laurel up to 2 meters will be there, and horses, some subsequent owner just puts horses on there to graze at will and eats the laurel hedge, I think we ought to recognise or somewhere acknowledge that we are aware that laurel is poisonous to horses. Because I wasn't totally sure till I looked it up prior to the site visit, and I looked it up on the web, and that's what it told me. So I'm happy to go along with the officer's recommendations, but I think I really want to tighten up on the conditions to make quite sure we get what we are asking for, and that our enforcement team have got all the strength at their elbow if what we've been assured will happen doesn't totally happen, like the removal of posts and containers and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to additional conditions, etc. in a minute. Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman, but I think Councillor Goodridge and Councillor Byam have pretty well stolen what I was going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of queries. First of all, can I just have confirmation from officers that the previous planning application, WA 2014-0366, referred to exactly the same site? The red line boundary was exactly the same, please. Thank you.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Thank you. And secondly, I applaud Councillor Goodridge's knowledge of laurel hedging, and my concern about the laurel hedging was, I'm afraid, didn't know it was poisonous to horses, but was the look of it in an area of AGLV. You know, this laurel hedges can become very, very tall and very ugly, I'm afraid, and I did consider that perhaps native species, a mixture of native species on a hedge would perhaps be a bit more appropriate in this area of AGLV. Also, the change of usage on the actual previous application for the keeping of horses, and the fact that there is chickens on the land for 2 years, is that a breach of condition, or is that absolutely fine? Sorry, thank you.
Victoria, would you like to address some of those?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. With regards to the chickens on the land, that's why the current application's got mixed use to agricultural. So it's considered that the keeping of those chickens where they are is agricultural, so hence the mixed use. The chicken element wasn't on the 2014 permission. Thank you, Chair. Would you like me to go on to
Yes,
answer?
would you like to address the hedge and the removal of various items from the site?
Thank you, Chair. With regards to the horse walker, yes, that was confirmed on site. Indeed, it was the same horse walker and it was to be moved. With regards to the container and the posts that are on site, they don't form part of this permission. So, therefore, any concerns with regards to their lawfulness at the current time would be dealt with by the enforcement team. So, with regards to the posts not being there, so anything that is there that does not form part of this permission would therefore be subject to enforcement investigation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Would anybody like to come back?
Yes,
Councillor Goodridge, would you like to come back?
I appreciate that is the situation, as Victoria has helpfully told us, but I was saying belt and braces, and so there's no confusion, and I was thinking it might be wise just to spell it out on this, on the basis we grant it, that all structures and things that are currently on site that are not included on the plan will be removed prior to development, really, because they can't do quite a lot of it until you know, that they are removed prior to the development being carried out, so that they can see it in black and white that this has got to happen, and they don't suddenly think, well, we'll leave the horse walker where it is, and then they put the store up and they can't get the container out, and you know, we have all that fun and games. So I think, you know, prior to development, to put it down. I appreciate we don't need to, but I just feel it's belt and braces. and whether we should have the condition about the laurel to actually say it should be such hedge, to be agreed by officers, because hawthorn, for example, would be absolutely fine, and that can grow quite quickly, and is fine for horses. Horses don't like it because they don't like it. It's prickly. So I just wonder whether it would be better. I appreciate the plan says laurel, and therefore we can't, I don't think, put a condition that it's some other species, but we could say such species as to be agreed by the officers. Just a suggestion.
Thank you. I'll let the officers consider that. Councillor Vorojewski.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I wholeheartedly agree with making it as clear as daylight that conditions in whichever form they need to be adhered to. And as we have history in this case, I think there's even more of a reason for making that extremely clear. I'm just going on from the laurel, a little bit of useless information for you. We're not allowed to shred it where I am because of dogs walking on it. It can poison the pads. So if you can do that to dogs when it's shredded because of what the toxins it release, what can it do to a horse who's hungry and eating it as an alternative? My concern here as well, with regards to the animal welfare, is regarding the stable block. I know you've got the appropriate doors and all the rest of it, but is there any other lighting, natural daylight? And I'm sorry, forgive me, I didn't have the opportunity to go to the site visit because I was working, but I have been to the site before because I can remember previous applications. And perhaps I've missed it in the report, but in terms of the roof, is there any lighting in the roof to allow extra actual daylight to accompany the actual entrance and exit? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend, you wish to come back? No? Okay. Right, officers, would you like to address those various points?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll have a go. I don't profess to have any horsey knowledge whatsoever. I'm a cat keeper. But with regards to the laurel hedging, it has been proposed by the applicant. We have to allow the applicant a degree of responsibility in terms of their animal husbandry. We have a situation here whereby a fence has been erected under permitted development rights, which in itself arguably has a harmful impact on the character of the area. Laurel hedging, like it or loathe it, it's fast growing and it provides a green screen. We have to allow, as I say, the applicant a degree of responsibility with regards to their horse keeping. I too consulted Google with regards to horses, and it was indicated to me that where there is alternative grazing possible, horses are unlikely to go anywhere near the laurel. In this case, the applicant owns the adjacent paddock, they have a horse walker, and they are tethered. So I think we have to leave that at the applicant's discretion with regards to the care of their animals on the site. With regards to Councillor Vorojewski's question with regards to daylight, just check the elevations. There don't appear to be any roof lights or anything. There are a couple of windows shown on the elevations which I think would tally with where the stables are shown to be. Notwithstanding that, this application was actually accompanied by a vet's report with regards to the suitability, the size of the site, the conditions in which the horses would be kept. So again, the animal husbandry is not necessarily something that we as a planning authority can concern ourselves with, but I think you can take some comfort that it has actually been scrutinised by a professional with that relevant qualification. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, Councillor Goodridge.
I can answer the question. There is, in the roof, I noticed there was some perspex rather than solid roof in one 6 foot by 4 foot, 6 foot by, well, 8 foot by 4 probably section, which is just on the right as you go in, roughly where the partition where it says stable and whatever the front thing is, I can't read. But washing, is it washing equipment or something? But it's on the right. There is a perspex roof.
Thank you. Councillor Byam.
Just want to say I had a chat with a horse really correctly, and he didn't complain anything about the light, so I think we're probably okay.
He was wearing dark glasses. Okay, members. Yes, Councillor Townsend.
Sorry, Mr Chairman, could I just ask officers, because of the conditions saying that the maintenance is to include the replacement of any parts of the laurel hedge that die, could that include perhaps the maintenance is because the laurel hedge is there already, isn't it? Yeah. Could this include the maintenance? No, there's not a hedge there at the moment. Oh, okay. So if we are detailing laurel, could we not say native species then within that rather than laurel?
I think Catherine's point is that we're addressing the application as submitted by the applicant, and they've specified the laurel hedge. So, unless we refuse the application, correct? Would you agree with that?
I think the alternative available to you is to not agree the condition that we have recommended and to propose an alternative condition along the lines of a scheme to be submitted detailing the hedging to include a native species. If members are concerned in that respect, then that would be the alternative. You are not agreeing the detail of that plan, you are reserving it to be discharged via condition at a later date. That would be my advice to you. Thank you, Chairman.
I think in light of the general concern expressed, I think, would we all agree that that would be a good move? Good, jolly good. So, shall we move on to, sorry, Steve, you wish to say something?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just coming back to the question of whether to impose conditions requiring the removal of the container and the 3 posts, the chicken coop that never was. I think the challenge with that is the test of any condition attached to a planning consent is that it has to be necessary and relevant to the development to be permitted. And actually what we're talking about here is things that are not as part of the development to be permitted, but stand on their own 2 feet as a change of use of the land for the storage of a container, which is unlawful, and I suppose a structural operation in terms of the installation of those posts, which is also unlawful. It therefore, as Victoria was saying, does fall to be considered on enforcement grounds rather than planning condition grounds. There's absolutely no reason why we can't word a strongly worded letter to go with any permission or refusal, whatever it turns out to be, drawing the applicant's attention to the fact that there are these outstanding matters that have not been resolved by the planning application and that the enforcement team will be monitoring the situation to ensure they are dealt with. That's fine. That's outside the scope of imposing planning conditions that have to meet statutory tests. So I'd certainly be recommending that, but I don't feel that it would meet as I say, the national test for conditions, because they're actually talking about things that are outside the scope of what you're there determining tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Right, so if we can move on to the revised recommendation, is that subject to, I've got a whole list of things here, subject to conditions 1 to 6 with amendments to conditions 3 and 4, and additional conditions, condition regarding commercial activities, condition regarding equestrian-related vehicles only, condition regarding visibility displays, removal of condition 3 and detail an additional condition or a revised condition 3 for details of hedging to be supplied and agreed by planning authority, all as detailed in the report, the update sheet, and also including informatives 1 to 8. Permission be granted. All those in favour? Against? Abstention?
2, Chairman.
So permission is granted. We have no items to consider in exempt. So thank you for your time, and I close the meeting.